All right, well, welcome to the webinar, the MM-ISAC webinar on global positioning systems. It's brought to you by the MM-ISAC and GMG through our partnership on our joint working group. The webinar today will be delivered by Dr. James Stockton, who is the Director of Research at the MM-ISAC.
Okay, so get started. I'm going to be talking about global positioning systems and the strengths and weaknesses. We're going to talk about the satellites, ground stations, and the actual receiver that is in your vehicles. Right now, above us is 31 satellites at any one time. And they are on such an orbit that we can have four in plain view at any one time. And that's critical to have four for accuracy. These orbital planes are set up and are tracked. So every satellite stays in its own orbit. There are 7 spares up there. So currently the Space Force has 31 satellites up at any one time. We are changing versions of satellites and capabilities. And we'll talk about the additional frequency here in a minute. So each satellite travels around the Earth twice a day, and at any one time, you're pretty much assured to get a minimum of 4 satellites, which is critical. They have an atomic clock in there. The new version's atomic clock can go down to 1 billionth of a second, and this is critical. Because of how the satellites work. The other thing about each satellite is it has a discrete ID. This discrete ID lets your receiver know what satellite it's talking to, and then it sends what time the signal got sent from that satellite. If you look on a map and you look out to a tower, you use triangulation to figure out where you're at. We do not use it with GPS. We know how far because of how long it took the signal to get to our satellite receiver. So that discrete ID and what time the signal gets sent is what your GPS receiver receives in your vehicle. There are currently 3 frequencies that they're operating on. 1575.42, 1227.6 megahertz, and 1176.45 megahertz. And those are the 3 signals ranges that we have to be concerned about later on. We have the GPS transmitters from the ground stations. These transmitters have to continually update the atomic clocks. And Newton figured it out that time clock would change in space. So a GPS, even with the atomic clock in space, time has to be readjusted. That's when the prime receivers are prime reasons that we have to have ground stations updating. They also check to make sure that the satellites are working properly and are on the right orbit. Because if a satellite's not in the right orbit, then it will cause errors within your GPS signal. If they didn't update the time on a regular basis, it would cause up to 6-mile error in signal per day. Okay. Now, receivers. Your receivers receive the information from the satellite, and I'm talking the discrete ID and the time it was sent. And it uses that to verify that the satellite is in the right orbit. because if it's not on that orbit for that discrete ID, it will throw that signal out. It has an internal almanac that's updated by the ground stations. So if orbits change, your GPS inside a mechanism knows that that satellite has moved to a different orbit. So how does it work? It takes the time sent data to the time received to determine its distance from the satellite. In other words, if you only have one satellite, you could draw a sphere in distance all the way around that satellite, and you could be anywhere on that sphere or globe. Now, from one satellite, the receiver knows its distance, but doesn't know any directions. So by adding even another satellite in there, now I have a circle. So trilateration, now I know that I am somewhere on that circle. By having a third satellite, now I know where those three satellites intersect, that I have to be in one of those 2 points. The fourth one gives me a single point that I can be at. And that is why you have to have 4 birds, as we call them in the Army, in order to have a good GPS signal. Now, because of the spoofing requirements, it would take someone that had not only almanac data and the discrete ID, but they would also have to get in between the satellite and the receiver to spoof it. And that would mean that it'd have to be a actual nation hacker or nation bad state actor in order to spoof. It is very, very difficult to spoof even one GPS signal, no less 2, maybe 3, in order to throw your GPS to give it a correct signal saying you're somewhere else on the map. If anything, it will just, if they try to spoof it, it will cause error codes in the system. And basically it's back to just the signal being jammed or the GPS shutting down. What really is the weakness of GPSs is denial of service. If someone goes into that area and jams these satellite frequency ranges, they would have to have a high-powered, pretty directional system, but this would cause all the GPS in a certain area to go down. And that's to include trucks' GPSs, that's include, just think of anybody that uses any type of GPS system would automatically be shut down in that area. It leaves a massive footprint. So if you had the capabilities, you could triangulate where the denial of service is coming from pretty easy. So I did some research. I'm sure there's other things out here. There are detector devices that they put on commercial trucking. And it basically says, it runs about $1,300, and it just tells you that your signal is getting jammed. And that will let the trucker know that their signal is getting jammed, not to rely on their GPS. Now, that lets you know there's signal there, but you don't know what location, or basically, other than the jamming signal strength going up or down, whether you're getting closer or farther away from the jamming signal. Now, a company hired by a 3-letter organization developed these direction finders, and they can tie into computers, and it's a blade fan that you can point, and that point can give you a reading. So if you're on 2 different locations, even on different sides of the mine, and you go there, you can figure an X on the map and find the actual spot that is being jammed. This would probably be something like this would be great to have mounted on a couple vehicles, so that you could figure out who's jamming and shutting down your mine pretty quickly. I'm sure there's other systems out there. I just found this one out of a company out of Florida. So we kind of covered the GPS basics. Spoofing would be very hard to do unless you're a nation state. Jamming would probably be a little more economically reasonable and capabilities of a normal eco-terrorist type organization. But I believe we could have countermeasures in place to direct the authorities to where you're getting jammed from. I know that was about 10, 15 minutes. And I'm going to open that up to questions. And there's my references.